Hi everyone.
Hi, I'm Mary,
I'm Bethany.
and this is this week's Spotlight, and we're going a little earlier this week because it's International Women's Day on Wednesday, and so we thought it'd be a great idea to meet with Betty Folliard from ERA-MN, which is Equal Rights Amendment, Minnesota. And so in a minute we'll be talking to Betty, but first I wanted to say that it's a Facebook Live event, so if you have any questions or if anything pops into your mind that you wanted some more information on, just drop us a line and write us a comment, and then we'll include that in the interview.
Yes, and we're excited to be co-sponsoring Wednesday's event at the Capitol with ERA-MN. So here's Betty, and we'll talk a little more about that.
Thanks, ladies.
Hi, Betty. I wanted to ask you first, as a former legislator and host of a Women's Place radio show,
Just pick it up. Go ahead.
what is it? What passion brought you to get involved in women's issues and the ERA in particular?
So, I've been working on equal rights for women for many years now. And as a legislator, I was the pro-choice lead in the Minnesota House of Representatives for a period of time. My activism goes back to the 60s. And what's so really exciting to me right now is that this is like the 60s now. It's that rebirth of activism and the importance of activism. And so we are here now once again, ready to work on equality for all, not just for some, but for all.
And so the ERA has a long history, the Equal Rights Amendment. Can you start us at the beginning and sort of
Oh,
lead us through
sure.
what happened?
Okay, so Alice Paul, one of the great suffragists of the early 20th century, after writing the language of the 19th Amendment, which passed, and the 19th Amendment, you'll remember, is the one right that is named in the Constitution for women, and it's to vote. She wrote the language for that. She then took the same language and created the Equal Rights Amendment, and in 1923. And that language is only 4 words different than the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment was voting rights, and this was going to be the 20th Amendment, is equality of rights shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. That's all it is. It's 24 words is the Equal Rights Amendment. So what she did then was, she brought it forward, and she was a Republican. It was entered by Republicans in, I think, every Congress up until the 1970s, but it didn't pass until 1972. In 1972, it passed through the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate. It was sent out to the states to be ratified. And when you ratify an amendment to the Constitution, it requires 38 states to pass it. Unfortunately, the Equal Rights Amendment got what I would call an arbitrary deadline put on it. I call it arbitrary because only 2 constitutional amendments in all of the history of this country have ever been given a deadline. And so we were only given 10 years to pass women's rights. In 1982 then, by 1982, it had passed through 35 states in the nation, but the sunset took effect. And at that point, all the air went out of the bubble, and we needed to regroup. There just wasn't any energy to keep on pushing that boulder uphill. But in the late 1990s, early 2000s, these groups all across the country have started to reemerge and saying, wait, we can just remove that arbitrary deadline out of the language. It's a simple majority vote by Congress to do that, and then we can pass the Equal Rights Amendment through 3 more states, and we'll embed it into our U.S. Constitution. So that energy has been happening all over the country right now. And Mary, you might know that Nevada is poised to be the first unratified state in 35 years to actually pass the Equal Rights Amendment, to ratify it ratify it as a state. And that's bringing this all back to life.
So if we go back, what has been the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment? Because it would seem that it makes perfect sense.
Well, interestingly enough, there was a North Carolina legislator back in the 80s who was the primary reason why it didn't pass back then. And his reason, his name was Sam Ervin. Sam Ervin. And his reason was that it was a folly to treat women and men legally equal. That was his excuse. There are various excuses. Back in the 70s, it was that, well, the Equal Rights Amendment would cause same-sex bathrooms. Well, we have same-sex bathrooms. It said that it will cause gay marriage. Well, we have gay marriage. It said it will cause women to have to fight in combat. Well, we have women fighting in combat. Women are fighting and dying in combat for their country, and they still don't have equal rights. So all of these were kind of manufactured. The Phyllis Schlaflys of the world and the Sam Ervins of the world were just basically saying, no, we like this structure. We want to keep the men on top and the women below the men when it comes to equal rights.
So what has it always been? Has it been a partisan issue? Or?
It wasn't a partisan issue. You know, every president of the United States in the 20th century, between 1923, when the Equal Rights Amendment was written, all the way up to the 1980s, supported and advocated for equal rights and for the Equal Rights Amendment. Nixon and Ford were very involved in it, and also their wives, their spouses were very vocal. Betty Ford, very vocal on the Equal Rights Amendment.
So why has that changed?
Well, partly it was that something that happened in the 1970s really seemed to polarize this nation, and it was the issue of abortion. But the interesting thing about abortion is that abortion is not an equal rights issue, and the reason why it's not is because men can't get pregnant. There's no equivalent. It's a false equivalent. You can't have, as long as men can't get pregnant, it's not an equality issue because there's nothing to compare it to.
So you're saying the Equal Rights Amendment would have nothing to do, would have no impact on that issue?
Exactly. It was actually determined on a privacy issue in the Constitution, and that was the decision of Roe v. Wade. And so it's something that the justices had to find a completely different place to settle abortion from equal rights. But the Equal Rights Clause in the Constitution and many of the other laws that circulate right now to try to get us to equality are piecemeal, and we keep on falling between the cracks. I think the key here, Mary, is that the Equal Rights Amendment would embed constitutional equality into our Constitution. It would embed it would ensure that discrimination on the basis of sex is outlawed. And as long as we just have a law here and a law there, like Lilly Ledbetter, that has a little bit of workplace discrimination, different things, the Equal Rights Clause, so many things don't state what we need to state in order to get equal access to justice in America. And because the Constitution controls all of the courts in the land, we're not, as long as we're not named in the Constitution, we're not getting what we need.
And what about the issue of race? How does that feature in this campaign?
Well, it's so important for people to understand that the third wave of feminism is inclusive and intersectional, and it wasn't always that way. Historically, we had some wonderful women of color who were key leaders in the movement towards equality. You go all the way back to the 1920s. all the way up to the 70s with wonderful people like Bell Hooks and Shirley Chisholm and Angela Davis, others. And then, coming forward, our organization, go to our website, eramn.org. The first picture you can see that we're inclusive, we're intersectional. We have leaders from various groups across the state and various diverse ethnicities and races that are a part of this. Also, just look at our legislation. We've got legislation at the state level, and our chief authors are Ilhan Omar, Rena Moran, Scott Dibble, Sandy Pappas, Dick Cohen, and Frank Hornstein, and they represent a very diverse part of our communities.
So if we just go back to, we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment right now. What's the implication of that for women?
So wage discrimination, let me just go to my notes here a second, because this is really key. Wage discrimination, domestic violence, international women's rights, rape and sexual assault, female poverty, pregnancy discrimination, female incarceration, and the law, those piecemeal laws, all are working together right now to thwart women's progress. And an Equal Rights Amendment has the capacity to change that. That's, it's all the pieces. I keep on talking about the Equal Rights Amendment as the umbrella. It's the umbrella over all these issues that individually we're working on, but collectively we can have a much sounder, straighter voice if we work on the Equal Rights Amendment.
So give us an example of how that works.
So right now there's a wonderful book called Equal Means Equal. And in it, Jessica Neuwirth, who's the head of the Equal Rights Amendment Coalition, which is a national coalition, talks about various lawsuits that have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court and been turned back because we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. So things like pregnancy discrimination, things like violence against women, issues like pay equity, and laws that unjustly discriminate against men, all would be directly affected if we protected our population against discrimination on the basis of sex. And that's the kind of key here is, what does it do? Well, there are other things that the Equal Rights Amendment, the effect will have, because once we do this, it's good for business. It's going to increase our GDP. It benefits our economy, because when women do better, everybody does better. It gives credit to us internationally, because right now we're one of 7 countries in the world who haven't even passed the language of the international treaty to protect against discrimination against women.
Which are the other? What are the
Well, so the international treaty, first of all, is the Conference on the Full Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It's called CEDAW, and some of our listeners might have heard of CEDAW. And CEDAW passed, it was an international treaty that was developed by the UN back in the late 70s, I believe. And then subsequently, over the years, it was passed through every country in the world except these 7 countries. So it passed through 187 countries in the world. And the 7 countries that did not pass CEDAW were Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Iran, 2 tiny countries in the South Pacific of Palau and Tonga, and the United States of America. So the United States of America did not pass CEDAW. The Equal Rights Amendment and CEDAW are inextricably linked, because when we do pass it, we will immediately be out of compliance with CEDAW because we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment in our Constitution. That's really important, because every new country that has come about since 1948 or something has had an equal rights amendment in their constitution, and all these countries have equal rights amendment embedded in their constitution. The United States cannot be a beacon of light in the world unless we have equal rights established in our constitution.
So, I've read statistics somewhere that say that the great majority of Americans actually believe that equal rights is part of the Constitution.
Yeah, yes.
So, given that it looks like most people are for it, why has it not been passed? What are the barriers?
So, okay, why do they think we have it? Well, because it passed through the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate in 1972. And then it passed through these 35 states. So, for example, here in Minnesota, there was an enormous push to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1970s, and we were one of those states that ratified it. Of course, that ratification became null and void when it was expired by the artificial deadline that was put on it. But what people saw in the papers at the time was, we won, ERA passed, we ratified it. But they didn't see the whole picture. And the whole picture was we didn't get to that critical number of 2/3 of the states, 38 states, before this artificial deadline was put on it. The artificial deadline is, I think it says June 2nd, 1982. Congress has the power to take out those words, June 2nd, 1982, out of the preamble of the bill, and it's a simple majority vote to do that, and that re-engages the Equal Rights Amendment, so we only have 3 more states to pass it. And Mary, right now, we have major efforts in, as I mentioned at the beginning, Nevada. Nevada is poised to actually pass it and be the first state to ratify the ERA in 35 states, in 35 years. There are huge efforts in Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Missouri, Kansas, Illinois. Illinois was the only northern industrialized state in the nation that did not pass the Equal Rights Amendment back in the 70s and 80s.
So these are all states that did not ratify it?
Yes, there are 15 states that did not ratify, but there are organizations that we are connected, that ERA Minnesota is connected to all across the country, who are working within their own states to do what they can. What we can do here in Minnesota, and what folks can do on Wednesday here at the Capitol in Minnesota, is come and say to our leaders that women's rights are equal rights, that women's rights are human rights, and that we need an Equal Rights Amendment in our Constitution. We've got the 2 pieces of legislation. One is the resolution to Congress to remove the deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment. That little bit of words, June 2nd, 1982, is all they have to take out.
So just to be clear, these are 2 new pieces of legislation?
Well, we had them, the other piece is the Minnesota Equal Rights Amendment, which would be to embed an Equal Rights Amendment into our state state constitution. Though that piece has been going on for years. I think that one of our chief authors, Dick Cohen, has been putting it in since 1982. I'm not sure when he actually first got elected, but he's been doing it every year that he was in office. The resolution to Congress to remove the deadline, that's newer. I first brought that to ERA Minnesota's attention in 2015. We put it in there. It passed through the state Senate in that session, 56-6. It was bipartisan. It was a huge vote, and it was very successful. But the Republicans in the House wouldn't allow it to have a hearing. This year, once again, the Republicans, it's falling on deaf ears. They're not allowing a hearing. So we want to get people a critical mass of people to say, too big to ignore, to say, now do you hear us? Do you hear us now?
So the issue for the Republicans, and what reason they're giving for not allowing it to have a hearing in the House?
I think it's because they think it's a political issue. And I actually talked directly to the leadership when in 2015, when the the Senate majority, I'm sorry, when the Senate Republicans voted with Democrats to remove the deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment, I went and talked to their leadership and thanked them and said, you know, they said, well, we think this might be political. I said, there's nothing political about human rights. Human rights just are. They exist. And it is our duty to claim them, and it is your duty to help us by stepping out of the way. That this is our right. We're on the right side of history here, and we will win.
So at a state level, there are two bills. Can you give us the numbers of those bills?
Yes.
And who are the authors of them?
Yes.
Just
So,
in case people want to watch out for them.
or if there are people listening who want to write to them, you've got the wonderful postcards. Send them the postcards, and we'll have that for you. Let me see if I've got that right here. I do. Yes. Do I? I hope so. So, SF 224 and HF 869. SF 224 and HF 189. Don't let me misspeak. 224 and 189. That is the ERA resolution to Congress asking Congress to remove the deadline. Then the other bill we have, now let's see, we've got more than this. We've got, I only have two of the ones. If you look up SF 101 and HF 313, and we also have the one that is, those are Dibble and Hornstein, but we also have the Cohen and Omar one for that. And so we'll have to, I'll try to get that. Yes, I just realized that we haven't got both of those on there, so I'll put that on our mailer too.
And when are these coming up?
Well, we're going to ask them to have a hearing when we go on Wednesday. We'll do a press conference and ask for a hearing. All of these bills have had hearings, hearing requests. They just haven't had an answer.
So just backtracking a bit, because we'll talk
And Bethany,
more
maybe
about...
you can look up those two for me so that I give the numbers out. That'd be great. Thanks.
So we're going to talk more about the event on Wednesday in a minute, but so right now, given the situation we're in, what is the plan, like the larger plan? So there's a plan at a federal level and there's a plan at a state level.
Yes.
Can you just briefly explain how that works?
We just keep on turning up the burner. This is a grassroots effort to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And so we just keep on growing our numbers so that we're too great to ignore. We are so established with our legislation, and it's so clear. Like I say, 24 words. It's so transparent, and so we continue to organize statewide and nationally. There are one of the wonderful national groups is ERA. Action that's been going to the states. They're there right now in Nevada. Another great group that has been so helpful is PDA, People Demand Action. It came out of Progressive Democrats for America, and they're working on this 3-state strategy. At the national level, we've got all of our Democratic congressional members on the legislation. All of our Democratic congressional members. We have made great efforts to talk to our Republican members. And I did have the opportunity to talk to Congressman Eric Paulson face-to-face 2 years ago. And he said, no. Well, he didn't say no. He said, well, we'll look into it. But his people then said, no, Representative Paulson will not be helping you on this. And again, it's back to the fear factor. What are they afraid of? What about equal rights is fearful? And that goes back to our need as citizens to have the conversations with our family members, to sit down and explain what this means. What does it mean? Well, it means that we'll have equal access to justice in America, that we won't have these false barriers in our way.
So you mentioned the 3-state strategy.
Yes.
Just can you briefly explain?
Yes, the 3-state strategy is what the resolution to Congress to remove the deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment at the national level is. And all it does is, again, remove those words, June 2nd, 1982, out of the preamble, so that they can't, that 3 more states can pass it, so that we reach that pinnacle of 38 states, 2/3 of majority that are ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment. When that happens, it will go into our U.S. Constitution, and we will then have equal justice under the law. And that's 161 million Americans. If you just count the women, that's 161 million Americans. You know, that's all women. And then you think about the men that this impacts, because there are laws that unjustly impact men. And I'll give you an example of that. And it's named in the book, Equal Means Equal. It's that if a man goes overseas and he has a relationship with a woman, a child comes out of that relationship, but they're not married, that man cannot bring that child and that child automatically have citizenship here in America. If a woman goes overseas, has a relationship with a man overseas from a different country, and she brings the child back, that child is given citizenship. So that is an unequal law that is discrimination on the basis of gender. So it's just one example, but I think it's a very good one.
And so what can people do about this?
So
right now, if we break it down to different areas of action that people can take.
So people can show up on Wednesday and join us in room G23 between 9:30 and 11:30, and they'll get trained up and get their marching orders of where to go. They'll give instructions. We're going to have team leaders who will take people around to talk, to go to legislators' offices. We will, on that day, we will also have a big picture, because that is also, it's International Women's Day, but it's also a day without a woman, the movement that you all are a part of, and I am a part of, and the women legislators who support equal rights are going to be wearing red on that day. And they're going to, so the legislators and women staff members over at the Capitol will be wearing red. They're going to come out onto the Capitol steps at 11:45 a.m. and we're going to have a photo op. We're going to put all of our folks around them to be able to show to the public that we mean this, that this is critical to us. It's one of the principles of Women's March. And the Equal Rights Amendment is the superhighway to get to equality in America. So the other thing they can do is they can write to their legislators. They can go to eramn.org, and on that website there's the fact sheets. You know, you can pull those off. You can take out any part of that. You'll see our news releases. You'll see this event listed. And they can join us. They can become a member of ERA Minnesota, sign up. There's no joiner fee. We just are activists who are working for equality. That's who we are.
And Betty, we shared in our comments section all the bills and how to go on your website, ERAM.
Oh, excellent.
So
thank you.
They have that info.
Thank you, Bethany.
And so on Wednesday, there's an opportunity to get trained to lobby your legislator, and then to actually meet legislators and talk to them about the issues around equal rights. That's what's
Yes.
happening with, yeah.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
you know, there's so many people. There's this kind of a gap between those who will come outside and you know, stand outside of the Capitol, and those who go inside. It's kind of like there's a fear about coming inside, and we're saying, come on inside, and we'll show you. If you don't know how to do this, I had one lovely young woman write to me, and she says, well, I'm a feminist, but I'm an introvert. And I don't know how to do this. Will somebody come and help me? And I said, yes, we have team leaders who will go around with you. Those who just want to be part of a big group, we will be out in front of the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate chambers from 11 o'clock on with groups just doing visibility. So if you just want to come and hold a sign, or you want to write a note to your legislator when they're on the House floor and just talk to them one-on-one, we'll show you how to do that. We know how to do that. Been there, done that. Did you get those other numbers for me of the legislation that I left out by any chance?
That's what we shared in the comments. So
Oh, that's in the comments.
Yep.
Okay, and do you happen to have them so I can just mention them? Because I had it was the SF 101 and HF 313 I had, but there were two other bills. If we don't have them,
yeah,
we'll just look on the
SF
website.
224,
SF 224
HF 189.
and HF 189. Now that's I'm sorry. There's two more, but I'll
HF
get them.
313, SF 101.
Yeah, and there's two more.
two more.
We'll
Yeah,
add those later.
we'll add them. We'll add them in.
So is there, I think we've covered most stuff now. I'm wondering if there's anything else you wanted to mention.
This is a life passion for so many people. It's just amazing. You know, when I talk to some of the folks who came before me here in this state, like Corinne Horrible and Emily Ann Tuttle and Retha Clark King and Peggy Lucas, who fought this back in the 70s and the 70s and the 80s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, really. It just warms my heart to know that we can continue this to eventually get to fruition. This is not an easy hill to climb, but as I say, we're on the right side of history, and we won't take no for an answer. Women's rights are human rights, and we will win.
Well, thank you very much, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Take care.